The rain keepers of the coast. The rain had a sound out here. Not the sharp, tapping kind that fell on city rooftops. Not the violent pellets rattling against windshields. But a deep, endless breath, like the earth exhaling through the trees. And in that breath, for thousands of years, lived a people who knew how to stay dry. In a land that drank over 100 inches of rain every single year. This story begins long before America had a name. Long before the first European ship sliced through the Pacific fog. Long before maps. Before borders. Before the world outside even knew such a place existed. It begins in the shadow of the Olympic Mountains. On the moss-draped edge of what is now Washington State. Where rain wasn't just weather. It was a shaping force, carving forests, feeding rivers. Deciding who thrived and who vanished. And yet, somehow. Against all logic. The Ho, the Quileute, the Makah. And other coastal tribes. Remained bone-dry, warm, and comfortable. No umbrellas. No plastic. No waterproof jackets. Just knowledge, ancient, tested, and astonishing. Tonight, you're going to hear the story of how they did it. So lie back. Let your breathing slow. Let your eyes grow heavy. And sink into a world where rain fell like time itself. The village that never got wet. Picture a longhouse. Not a small hut. Not a flimsy shelter. But a giant cedar cathedral. 40, sometimes 60 feet long. Carved from trees older than the Roman Empire. When the wind screamed. Its voice died against cedar walls so thick. They could turn aside storms as if swatting away mosquitoes. Inside, the air was warm. Dry. Comfortable. A fire crackled in the center, sending smoke spiraling upward. Through a perfectly engineered gap. A vent so precise that rain almost never made it through. Not by luck. By design. You see, the people of this coast didn't cut trees. They chose them. They read cedar the way a doctor reads a patient. Checking its straightness, its grain, its water content. They knew which trees survived lightning. Which soaked up the least moisture. Which lasted the longest in storms. Every longhouse was a masterpiece. Every joint interlocked so tightly. That wind and rain couldn't slip through. No matter how the sky roared. The Europeans would later say. Their houses are built as though by engineers. But the truth? They were better. Cedar, the miracle that stayed dry. Cedar was more than wood. It was a technology. A waterproof, rot-resistant, insect-repelling, naturally insulating, aromatic miracle of nature. The people called it the tree of life. Because cedar gave them dry houses, dry clothing, dry blankets, dry baskets, dry hats, dry tools, dry canoes. In a rainforest, staying dry wasn't a convenience. It was survival. You might think wooden hats wouldn't work. But cedar bark hats, shaped like upside-down cones, shed rain better than most modern waterproof gear. Even today, researchers test ancient designs and find them astonishing. But the greatest secret wasn't the hat, or the houses, or the clothes. It was something deeper, something older. A way of reading the rain. seeing rain before it fell. Elders could look at the sky. Just a certain shade of pale gray. A certain curl in the clouds. And say, 3 storms are coming. Not 2. Not 4. 3. And they would be right. They knew which winds carried warm wet air from the ocean. Which winds brought cold storms down from the mountains. Which storms lingered for days. Which passed in hours. This wasn't superstition. This was science, built from centuries of observation. And so, when the rain came, and it always came, they were ready. Waterproof clothing better than modern gear. Imagine standing in a rainforest storm. Rain pouring in sheets. The air cold enough to bite your bones. Now imagine you are dry. Completely dry. How? With clothes made not from cloth, but from the inner bark of cedar. Beaten and softened until it felt like cotton, yet repelled water like waxed canvas. They wore cedar bark capes, cedar ponchos, cedar skirts, woven leggings, waterproof hats. Soft, warm, breathable, rainproof. Tested by centuries of storms. Some anthropologists tried wearing replicas. In harsh weather. The result stunned them. We stayed dry. Not damp. Not mostly dry. Dry. Try doing that with a $300 modern jacket. The secret fires that never went out. Inside every house. A fire burned day and night. But here was the impossible part. It never died. Not once. Not in 100 inches of rain. How? Because the fire was fed cedar. Cedar that burned even after soaking. Cedar that resisted rot. Cedar that kept a flame alive. Its smoke drifting upward like prayer. And above the fire, hung high on cedar racks, was the final secret. Smoke dried everything. Clothes. Blankets. Tools. Fishing nets. Wooden bowls. Even mattresses stuffed with cattail fluff. Everything was hung above the fire. On slow, gentle smoke-drying racks. Not hot smoke. Not harsh flames. A soft, constant warmth. That removed moisture from the air. Faster than rain could add it. Night after night. The fire breathed upward. Turning damp into dry. Cold into warm. Rain into comfort. Visitors described stepping into these houses as stepping into another world. Dry floors. Dry air. Dry clothes. And the scent of cedar everywhere. No matter how the storm raged outside. Inside was peace. The rain was a friend, not an enemy. To outsiders, 100 inches of rain a year seemed like doom. But to these tribes, the rain brought salmon runs, fat elk in the wet forests, cattails for bedding, cedar softened for clothing, streams that never dried, rivers full of life. They didn't fight the rain. They listened to it, learned from it, used it. And in learning its rhythm, they mastered it. Western society would later build raincoats, gutters, heated homes, asphalt roads. But the people of the Pacific Coast, mastered rain. Without a single nail. Without a single metal tool. Without electricity. Without plastic. Without modern technology. They did it with knowledge. Ancient. Precise. Beautiful. The wisdom that still lives. Today, some of their descendants still weave cedar hats. Still build cedar houses. Still craft bark capes that shed rain like magic. And even now, scientists visit these communities to learn how a people stayed dry in one of the wettest climate zones in North America. The answer is simple. They worked with nature, not against it. And because of that, they remained warm, comfortable, and astonishingly dry for thousands of years. The storm hunters, weather readers of the rainforest. The rain never arrived quietly on the northwest coast. It didn't slip in softly the way morning dew settles on a window. Here, storms announced themselves long before they touched land. With a certain taste in the air. A deep hum behind the mountains. And a strange stillness rolling in from the ocean. Like the world was holding its breath. And the native tribes who lived there. The Ho, the Quileute, the Maka, and others. Could read that silence. As clearly as you read a sentence. This part of the story is about them. The storm hunters. Men and women who carried no devices. No compasses. No barometers. Yet predicted the weather. More accurately than most modern tools. So lie back again. Feel your shoulders soften. Let the rhythm of this ancient world carry you deeper into the quiet. The wind that spoke in codes. To the people of the Pacific coast. Wind wasn't just air in motion. It was a language. A storyteller. A warning. Elders said the wind had 4 voices. Each one belonging to a direction. And each direction bringing its own mood. The west wind came from the ocean, mild but heavy with rain. It meant long, soft showers that soaked the earth without fury. The south wind carried warmth, sweetened by distant lands. It meant storms that were fast but gentle, like rain brushed on by a painter. The north wind cut like bone, cold, dry. A wind that warned the tribe to gather wood, tighten house boards, and check every canoe. But the east wind, that one was feared. It crawled over the mountains, dragging unstable clouds, spinning the sky into strange patterns that even elders struggled to read. When the east wind blew, they said the storms could change direction mid-fall, split in 2, or double in strength, with no warning. And yet the storm hunters, those chosen from childhood, could read even that. The training of a storm hunter. Storm hunters weren't born with some mystical gift. They were trained from the time they were barely old enough to walk with the adults. A child would follow an elder to a cliff, overlooking the endless, gray Pacific. There, they would sit for hours, in silence, not speaking, not moving, just observing, learning how the waves bent before a storm, how birds flew lower when winds shifted, how the clouds narrowed, When heavy rain approached, it wasn't a school. It wasn't a lesson. It was a lifetime of listening. And slowly, a child learned the invisible signs. A ripple of cold air brushing their cheek. That meant a storm behind the horizon. A pause in the forest's birdsong. That meant wind approaching. The smell of salt turning sharp. That meant a gust forming over far-off waves. They learned to read the world. The way others read books. The silent ritual before a storm. When a heavy storm was coming, the entire village moved in quiet unity. No panic. No shouting. No rushing. Just smooth, practiced movements. Passed down through generations. Women pulled woven cedar mats over the outer walls of Longhouse. Not to block rain, but to guide it down the sides. Like water sliding off a stone. Men gathered driftwood from the upper beach. Wood that burned slow and hot, even when damp. Children collected dry tinder from places only they could reach. Hollow logs, tight crevices, ancient stumps that held perfectly dry bark, even in storms. And in the center of the village, the storm hunter stood still, eyes lifted to the sky, watching, listening, measuring the storm. The way a musician measures rhythm. The tribe trusted them completely, predicting what even satellites miss. Modern meteorologists often struggle with the northwest coast, because storms twist strangely over the Pacific, bending around mountains, and feeding off ocean currents. But the storm hunters knew things satellites didn't. They could smell warm rain before it reached land. They could hear the tone of different winds, sharp for the north, low for the west, whistling for the east. They could sense pressure changes by the weight of the air against their skin. Some could even predict when rain would begin, when it would stop, how long it would last, how strong the wind would be, whether lightning would follow, whether the river would swell, whether the ocean would turn dangerous. All without ever looking at a device. They didn't fight nature. They observed it so deeply that nature itself became a friend, a guide, a teacher. The most famous storm prediction. There is an old story, still told in many Pacific Northwest communities, about a storm so violent that even the sky seemed to tremble. European maps later estimated that storm to be one of the worst in 3 centuries. But the people were ready. A storm hunter named Kalaptu, barely 30 years old, walked to the beach one dawn and studied the waves for almost an hour. And then he spoke 6 words that sent the entire village into motion. The sea will rise tonight. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Tonight. His prediction sounded impossible. The ocean was calm. The sky was peaceful. No wind. No warning. But the people obeyed. They hauled canoes inland, tied houses shut with cedar rope, moved children to the upper platforms of the longhouses. And just after midnight, When the world was fully asleep, the sea surged forward. Like a giant inhaling. A massive storm slammed the coast. Tides rising higher than any living person had ever seen. But not a single person in Kalapta's village was lost. Not one canoe destroyed. Not one house washed away. When the storm passed, the people said, "He did not read the sky. He read the world." A science wrapped in silence. Scientists today sometimes call this hyperlocal awareness. A form of environmental intelligence, built from thousands of tiny observations across generations. But the tribes called it something simpler. Respect. If you respected the forest, it told you when a storm was hiding. If you respected the ocean, it warned you when it would rise. If you respected the wind, it whispered its plans. Respect was the technology. Silence was the teacher. Nature was the book. Why this knowledge still matters. Even now. In a world of satellites, digital radar, supercomputers, there are moments when storms surprise meteorologists. Moments when the coast behaves strangely, twisting rain in ways modern tools fail to predict. And when that happens, modern scientists sometimes turn to the old knowledge, to the descendants of the storm hunters, and they find wisdom, ancient, practical, precise, a reminder that the world can be read through more than data, if you learn how to listen. Cedar Engineering Secrets. Why their houses survived 100 years of rain. The forest that lined the Pacific Northwest coast was ancient. So ancient that some trees had lived through ice ages, through earthquakes, through centuries of storms that shook the world like a drum. And standing among those giants was the material that shaped an entire civilization. Cedar. Red cedar. Yellow cedar. Cedar that glowed warm even in darkness. Cedar that breathed its aroma into every home. Cedar that refused to rot, even when the sky poured 100 inches of rain, year after year. This chapter is not just about wood. It's about engineering. Hundreds of years ahead of its time. So relax again. Let the steady rhythm of rain wrap around you. Let the story carry you like a canoe drifting on a calm tide. Tonight, you'll hear how native tribes built houses that stayed dry, warm, and strong. Without nails. Without metal. Without modern tools. And outperformed many modern buildings. The house that breathed like a living thing. A cedar longhouse wasn't just a structure. It was a living system. It expanded in moisture, contracted in dry air, shifted slightly during windstorms, absorbing pressure rather than resisting it. Modern engineers call this a flexible architecture. Earthquake resistant, storm resistant, time resistant. Tribes simply called it the house that stood with us. The walls were made from wide, vertical planks, some as tall as a man, fitted so carefully that rain slid down them, like water sliding off smooth stone. But the magic wasn't just the cedar itself. It was the joinery. The engineering. The invisible craft. The puzzle that needed no nails. Imagine building a giant home. 40, 50, even 60 feet long. And never using a single nail. Instead, every beam, every post, every support structure was held together by carved grooves, tight mortise joints, cedar wedges, interlocking notches, cordage made of cedar roots. This created a frame so strong that storms shook around it, instead of through it. When the wind roared across the coast, modern houses rattled. Cedar longhouses breathed. Their joints flexed just enough to release pressure, protecting the house from cracking. A house that doesn't fight the storm survives. A house that moves with the storm lives. How the roof was waterproof without shingles. This is the part that amazes engineers today. The roof was made of overlapping cedar planks, wide and heavy, laid like giant wooden shingles. Without nails. They were held by weight alone. Each plank pinned down by thick cedar beams. Why no nails? Because nails rust. Nails loosen. Nails tear wood. But cedar planks, they swell in rain, locking themselves tighter. And they shrink in dry weather, allowing ventilation. A perfect natural cycle. Like breathing. This design allowed smoke to escape through small gaps, but kept rain out, even in downpours that lasted days. Engineers today say the design is self-regulating. The tribe simply said, it keeps us dry. The raised floor that never got damp. Rainforest floors are wet. Always wet. Always damp. Always soft. So the tribes built their floors elevated, supported by thick cedar runners that resisted rot for decades. Below the floor, air circulated constantly, drying the underside of the house, even during storms. Inside, the floor was covered with woven mats, cured hides, soft cedar bark blankets, cattail bedding. You walked barefoot and never felt cold. You slept above the ground and never felt damp. Some visitors in the 1800s wrote, their floors are warmer and drier than many European cabins. They were right. The fire that dried the house without burning it. Every longhouse contained a central fire pit. Not blazing. Not roaring. But slow. Steady. And constant. A perfect ember fire. The smoke rose upward through vent gaps in the roof planks, drying the entire structure over time. Cedar absorbed the smoke's oils, gaining more rot resistance, more insect protection, a warmer hue, a deeper scent. Fire didn't age a house. Fire preserved it. The older the house, the better it resisted rain. This wasn't coincidence. It was chemistry. A process modern scientists now call smoke curing. The cedar blanket walls. Here is one of the most astonishing secrets. The people used giant cedar bark sheets, peeled with skill, softened by ocean mist, smoked slowly, as movable wall covers. They hung like thick curtains, shielding weak spots from wind-driven rain. You could roll them up in summer, drop them down in winter. A primitive version of adjustable insulation. Houses had climate control before climate control existed. Houses built to last generations. Visitors in the 1700s found houses that had been standing for 70 years, 90 years, sometimes over 100 years, in a rainforest, with constant storms, with no metal, no nails, no concrete, just cedar, just knowledge, just craftsmanship, passed from one generation to the next, with absolute precision. Some homes were so well built that entire European expeditions recorded being astonished at their durability. They had come expecting huts. They found engineering, a civilization built from wisdom, not wealth. European settlers often measured progress in gold, in monuments, in stone cities. But the tribes of the Pacific coast measured progress in something more subtle. Does it last? Does it protect our children? Does it honor the land? Their buildings were not palaces, not towering, not meant to impress. But they were warm, dry, earthquake-resistant, storm-proof, replaceable, sustainable, beautiful in their quiet strength. A different kind of genius, a different kind of mastery, a different definition of progress. The quiet testament of cedar. When archaeologists study the remains of longhouses, they notice something astonishing. The houses did not fight the rainforest. They became part of it. When a longhouse finally aged out, the cedar slowly returned to earth, its nutrients feeding the next generation of giant trees. A perfect cycle, a perfect marriage of engineering and nature. A lesson whispered softly through the rain. Build with the land, and the land will shelter you. Night inside the longhouse. Stories, spirits, and the warmth of 1,000 winters. Night in the rainforest settles differently. It doesn't fall, it flows. Soft, heavy, thick as velvet. The air vibrates with quiet. The hush of distant waves. The far-off cry of an owl. The gentle patter of rain, tapping cedar roofs like fingers drumming a lullaby. And inside the longhouse, inside that warm wooden world, life awakened in a way no daylight ever could. This chapter takes you into that world. A world of flickering firelight, soft cedar-scented smoke, echoing stories, and an ancient rhythm that carried families safely through 100 inches of rain, year after year. So lean back, slow your breath, and walk with me into the heart of a native longhouse at night. The glow that spoke. The first thing you noticed when entering a longhouse at night was the glow. Not the bright, open fire of a European hearth, but a warm, low amber burn. A fire designed for heat, dryness, quiet, and storytelling. Not chaos. Not noise. The flame wasn't the point. The embers were. A master tender would keep the fire low, glowing like coals beneath a blacksmith's hand. So the smoke rose slowly, curling upward toward the ceiling gaps, like whispered secrets. And above, the cedar beams gleamed softly, reflecting tiny orange halos, as if stars had slipped indoors to listen. The layers of heat. The longhouse wasn't just warm. It had layers of warmth, like a natural thermostat. Closest to the fire, elders, storytellers, babies in cedar cradleboards. The middle, families sitting on mats, working quietly, weaving baskets or carving tools. At the edges, cooler air, where young men sharpened spears, or practiced tying nets. Farther up the walls, on raised platforms, the highest warmth, where people slept. Heat rose, so the beds were placed exactly where nature gathered it. No wasted wood, no wasted fire. Perfect efficiency. You lay on soft cattail bedding, under woven blankets, listening to the rain on the cedar roof, and felt completely, utterly safe. The silence that had its own rules. A longhouse wasn't loud at night, even with dozens of people inside. It breathed in a rhythm almost musical. Children whispered. Mothers hummed softly. The older ones polished cedar tools, with slow, steady movements. Outside, storms screamed. Inside, everything was calm. There were rules to this silence. You never interrupted a story. You never raised your voice near the fire. You never whistled at night. They believed it called spirits. You spoke softly, because the longhouse was a place of respect, and because the cedar walls held on to sound so well that even a whisper could roll from one end to the other. Silence wasn't emptiness. It was presence. The storytellers of the night. When the fire settled into its deepest glow, one person would rise. The story keeper. Each longhouse had one. A person trained from childhood to hold the histories, the legends, the genealogies, the victories, the warnings, and the wisdom of centuries. Tonight's story might be a tale about the trickster raven who stole light from the sky. A legend about Thunderbird, whose wings created storms. A memory of real battles, real ancestors, real journeys across frozen seas. Or a quiet teaching about how to walk with respect in a world where every stone had a spirit. Stories weren't entertainment. Stories were the blueprint of how to live. And as the storyteller spoke, children drifted into sleep, their dreams woven with eagles, forests, and ancient heroes, whose footsteps still echoed in the land around them. How they saw spirits. The longhouse wasn't just a shelter. It was a world of spirits. Every beam of cedar was believed to have a memory. Every plank knew stories. Every ember carried whispers. from past generations. At night, when the fire crackled, elders said it was the spirits, leaning closer to listen. Wind tapping the roof, a visiting ancestor. The sudden quiet outside, a guardian spirit passing by. They weren't afraid of spirits. They lived with them. They believed, as long as we honor them, they will walk with us. And so the longhouse was not just home. It was a bridge between earth and sky, between the living and the remembered. Nighttime work, a world of quiet craft. While some slept, others worked quietly in the warm glow. Men carved cedar paddles, smooth as river stones. Women wove baskets so tight they could hold water. Young hunters repaired nets and spears, fingers moving with silent precision. Elders shaped masks for ceremonies yet to come. The longhouse at night was alive, but softly, steadily, like a heart beating. The sound of scraping tools, the rustle of cedar bark, the soft shuffle of feet, they blended with the rain into one soothing harmony, a perfect lullaby for a world built of wood and water, a safe world in a storm-torn land. Outside, the rainforest was a different universe. Wind tore through treetops. Rain hammered the beach. The Pacific Ocean roared like a wounded giant. But inside the longhouse, you felt none of it. Only warmth. Only the scent of cedar. Only the glow of firelight, dancing across carved wooden pillars that held the history of a people. A storm could rage for 3 days, 5 days, even a week. But the inside never changed, because the cedar longhouse was more than shelter. It was a fortress, a cradle, a gathering of souls, a sanctuary that turned storms into background music. A night that never truly ends. When the fire dimmed to ash. When rain softened into a whisper. When the last storyteller's voice faded. The sudden quiet outside. A guardian spirit passing by. They weren't afraid of spirits. They lived with them. They believed, as long as we honor them, they will walk with us. And so the longhouse was not just home. It was a bridge between earth and sky, between the living and the remembered. Nighttime work, a world of quiet craft. While some slept, others worked quietly in the warm glow. Men carved cedar paddles, smooth as river stones. Women wove baskets so tight they could hold water. Young hunters repaired nets and spears, fingers moving with silent precision. Elders shaped masks for ceremonies yet to come. The longhouse at night was alive, but softly, steadily, like a heart beating. The sound of scraping tools, the rustle of cedar bark, the soft shuffle of feet, they blended with the rain into one soothing harmony, a perfect lullaby for a world built of wood and water, a safe world in a storm-torn land. Outside, the rainforest was a different universe. Wind tore through treetops. Rain hammered the beach. The Pacific Ocean roared like a wounded giant. But inside the longhouse, You felt none of it. Only warmth. Only the scent of cedar. Only the glow of firelight, dancing across carved wooden pillars. That held the history of a people. A storm could rage for 3 days. 5 days. Even a week. But the inside never changed. Because the cedar longhouse was more than shelter. It was a fortress. A cradle. A gathering of souls. A sanctuary that turned storms into background music. A night that never truly ends. When the fire dimmed to ash. When rain softened into a whisper. When the last storyteller's voice faded. The longhouse entered a deeper silence. But even then, even in that heavy stillness, the warmth clung to the air. The cedar scent lingered. And the walls held the memory of every story told. Tomorrow would bring more storms. More work. More stories. But for this moment, for this night, the world was safe. Held gently. In the arms of cedar and fire. The secret of the sky-dry people. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in endless curtains, whispering against the leaves like 1,000 soft rattles. And yet, in the village of the sky-dry people, not a single bed was wet. Not a single fire hissed out. Not a single child shivered beneath a soaked blanket. In other parts of the region, travelers struggled. Settlers dug trenches. Traders wrapped themselves with layers of wool that soon felt like sponges. But here, inside this mist-swallowed forest, life moved gently, quietly, impossibly unaffected by the storm. Elias, still the only outsider ever allowed to stay this long, listened to the sound of rainfall on the rooftops. It wasn't a sharp sound. Not a violent drumming. It was soft, almost padded, like rain falling on blankets. He stepped outside, careful not to disturb anything, and found Elder Awan already awake, sitting beside the great cedar pole that stood at the center of the village. "Sleep well?" Elder Awan asked, rubbing 2 small stones together until sparks danced. A warm flame soon rose from a pile of wood that, again, was perfectly dry. Elias nodded. "I don't understand. Everything out here should be drenched, but it feels as if the rain refuses to touch anything." Awan smiled, gently, with the calm of a man who knew secrets older than the oldest textbooks. "Rain touches us," he said. "But it does not claim us." He gestured for Elias to sit. "You think dryness is something that happens by accident. But for our people, dryness is something we cultivate, like patience, like silence, like memory." Then Awan did something unexpected. He reached into a carved wooden box, pulled out a piece of bark so thin it was nearly transparent, and held it above their heads. Rain fell on the bark. And the water rolled off instantly, racing across its surface as if frightened. Not a drop stayed. Elias stared. "What is that?" "Cedar skin," Awan replied. "The very first gift our ancestors learned to use. But it is not just the bark itself." He turned the piece over. Thin lines, etched with charcoal, formed a pattern that looked like swirling clouds. "This," the elder continued, "is the part no one outside our people ever understood. The pattern wasn't random. It was a message, a memory, a map." Elias leaned closer and realized it was the exact pattern of air currents that swept through the valley each winter. You draw the wind, Elias whispered. Awan laughed softly. No. We invite it. You see, dryness is not made by stopping the rain. It is made by teaching the air how to move. And suddenly, everything made sense. The way their homes were built high. The way their roofs curved like the wings of a heron. The way the paths in the village always seemed to slant gently downward. The way the walls breathed. The way the fire pits were raised on cedar frames instead of stone. Their entire village wasn't resisting the rain. It was cooperating with it. Guiding it. Redirecting it. Turning the monstrous downpour into a harmless silver mist that drifted around them without settling. Awan stood and motioned for Elias to follow him through the village. Watch the rooftops, the elder said. Elias watched, and felt chills flood his spine. The roofs didn't simply repel water. They channeled it. Every home guided the rain along specific grooves, down carved runnels, through hanging mats of woven cedar fiber that filtered and thinned the water until it evaporated on the warm air rising from beneath the structures. The whole village was a machine. An ancient, silent machine. Built not with gears or metal, but with intuition. With generations of observation. With a relationship to the environment deeper than any outsider had ever written down. Your people engineered this, Elias whispered. But it's beautiful. It doesn't look engineered at all. Because we did not build it in a workshop, Awan said. We built it in partnership with the world. They walked past a group of children jumping in puddles, laughing, while water from the rooftops twisted overhead like tiny silver ribbons caught in a gentle breeze. In your world, Awan said, you study nature. In ours, we listen to it. The words settled into Elias like warm smoke. He realized now why nothing in this village fought the storm. The sky-dry people weren't trying to outsmart the rain. They were learning from it. Living with it. Shaping their world so gracefully that even 100 inches of rain couldn't break their peace. As they reached the far edge of the village, Awan turned to him. You came searching for how we stay dry. But dryness is only the surface of the lesson. Elias swallowed. Then what is the real lesson? Awan touched his chest, right over his heart. That the world is never against you. We suffer when we forget to listen, and we thrive when we remember. And for the first time, Elias felt the rain not as a force, not as a burden, but as part of a vast, quiet conversation. The storm softened. The forest exhaled. The village breathed. And Elias realized he had not come to learn about dryness at all. He had come to learn about harmony. The rain fell. And he finally understood why the sky-dry people stayed dry. Not because they had shields. Not because they had tricks. But because they had wisdom. The night the forest spoke. That night, the rain didn't ease. It grew heavier, so heavy that Elias could barely see the trees beyond the village. The forest blurred into a soft, gray curtain. The smell of wet cedar filled the air. But still, none of the sky-dry people seemed worried. They moved slowly, peacefully, going about their lives as though the storm were only a distant hum. Elias sat inside the longhouse, listening to that hum. It was strange, soothing, almost hypnotic. Each drop sounded padded, softened, shaped, as if the rain itself had been convinced to behave. Awan sat beside him, carving something from a thick piece of cedar wood. The shavings curled like paper ribbons. You hear it yet? Awan asked without looking up. Hear what? Elias whispered. The forest, Awan answered. It's speaking tonight. Elias listened harder. At first, he heard only rain. But slowly, something shifted. Hidden beneath the sound of falling water was another rhythm, deeper, slower, like the steady breathing of the earth. Awan nodded when he saw the recognition in Elias's eyes. That is what our ancestors followed, the elder said. Not stars. Not maps. Not rulers. That sound. What does it mean? Elias asked. Awan blew the cedar dust off his carving. It means the storm is becoming aware of us. Elias froze. Aware? Awan chuckled. Not like a person. Not like a beast. But aware in the way a river senses a stone, or fire senses wind. The storm knows our shapes, our warmth. And we know its patterns. When you understand something well enough, it begins to understand you back. Thunder rumbled, slow and far away, like giants shifting in their sleep. Yet even with that deep sound, Elias felt no fear, only the sensation that he was inside something ancient. Something vast. A woman entered the longhouse, carrying a woven cedar basket. Inside the basket were long braids of cedar bark, soaked yet impossibly light. It is time, she said softly. Awan nodded and handed Elias the carving he had been shaping. It was a small wooden pendant, the size of a leaf. Delicate lines swirled across its surface, the same pattern Elias had seen earlier on the bark sheet. Wear this, Awan said. Tonight we show you what lies beyond dryness. Elias placed the pendant around his neck. It felt warm, too warm for something carved just moments ago. Almost alive. They stepped outside. The rain was heavier now, so heavy that the world seemed to bend beneath it. Yet the water didn't cling to Elias. It slipped off him like silk. The pendant glowed faintly, as if recognizing the storm. As they walked deeper into the village, people gathered silently. No one spoke. No one rushed. They simply stood in the rain, their faces calm, their breaths slow. Awan lifted his hands. The villagers followed. Their palms opened toward the sky. And then, the forest responded. Wind moved. Not violently. Not tearing through branches. It flowed. A wide, low current sliding across the ground and up around the people like a gentle tide. Elias gasped, the air felt warm despite the cold rain. It curled around him, twisting upward, drawing moisture off his skin, drying him even as water poured from the heavens. The entire village shimmered through the mist. It looked like the people were standing inside a living dome of air. The rain hit the invisible barrier and split, flowing around them like a river flowing around stones. This, Awan whispered, is the breath of the forest. Our ancestors learned to read its direction. Then they learned to ask it for help. Not by force, but by respect. The wind strengthened, not enough to break branches, but enough to guide the rain sideways. The people stood unmoving as the storm curved around the village. Elias felt tears rise in his eyes, not from emotion alone but from the sheer, impossible beauty of what he was witnessing. You didn't build this, Elias said softly. You learned it. Awan nodded. Yes. Everything we have came from listening. Dryness is a lesson. Harmony is the goal. The storm roared again, but this time Elias could hear it clearly. The deep, ancient voice beneath the rain. Awan leaned close and whispered. Now you hear the forest speaking. The wind circled them once more, carrying warmth and calm. For the first time, Elias didn't feel like an outsider. He felt as if the village had accepted him. And the storm had too. The rain continued, endless and silver. But Elias stood bone dry. Not because of shelter. Not because of invention. But because he had finally learned the first lesson of the sky-dry people. Nature listens when you do. The whispering canvas of rain. When Elias awoke the next morning, the storm was softer. Not gone, not weaker, just gentler, like a hand that had released its grip. Rain still fell in steady streams, but it moved differently now, almost artistically, swirling in slow spirals around the cedar trees before dissolving into mist. The village felt peaceful, washed clean, glowing with a soft silver light. Elias stepped outside and found the pendant still warm against his chest, pulsing faintly with each heartbeat. Awan was waiting for him. Not with tools. Not with explanations. But with a question. Now that you've heard the forest, Awan asked, are you ready to see it? Elias blinked. See it? I thought I already had. Awan shook his head. Seeing with your eyes is the smallest kind of seeing. He motioned toward the edge of the village. Elias followed. The path they walked was narrow, covered in cedar needles that made the ground soft and quiet. The rain above formed a silver curtain, bending and shifting as if it were clearing a path just for them. After a long walk, they reached a large clearing. But this clearing wasn't empty. It pulsed with life. Elias gasped. All around them stood tall, polished wooden pillars, 20, maybe 30 of them, rising from the earth like sacred sentinels. Each pillar was carved with spiraling grooves that caught the rain and guided it in flowing streams to the ground. Awan stepped forward and touched one of the pillars with reverence. This, he said, is the whispering canvas. Elias frowned softly. Canvas? Awan nodded. A canvas the rain paints on. A canvas that remembers what the sky felt like hundreds of years ago. He moved his palm along the grooves. Water flowed around his hand in smooth ribbons. Our ancestors carved these shapes by watching how rain behaves. They noticed patterns the way your scientists observe stars. Elias walked among the pillars. Some were thick and powerful. Some were slender and elegant. Yet every one of them hummed softly beneath the rain, like a low musical tone. Put your hand on it, Awan said. Elias obeyed. The moment his skin touched the wood, he felt a vibration, a gentle, rhythmic pulse that matched the fall of the rain. And then, something extraordinary happened. Images formed behind his eyes. Not sharp images. Not clear scenes. More like emotions wrapped in sound. Memories wrapped in rainfall. Shadows of stories too old for any ink or paper. He saw storms sweeping across ancient forests. People standing together, reading the sky. Cedar trees bending but never breaking. A mother teaching her child how to listen to the pattering rain. A young hunter carving the first spiral into a wooden post. A village forming not through construction, but through cooperation. It wasn't magic. It wasn't fantasy. It was memory. The forest had memory. And the rain carried it. Elias opened his eyes, breath caught in his chest. Awan watched him quietly. "You felt it," the elder said. Elias nodded slowly. "I saw something, something old. Something deep." Awan smiled gently. "That is the whispering canvas. It shows anyone who is willing to listen what the forest remembers. And what it fears." Elias blinked. "What it fears?" Awan looked up at the storm-heavy sky. "Yes. Even the land has fears. When the balance shifts too far, when people forget how to live with the rain, when the harmony breaks." He tapped the pillar. "These carvings record how to heal that balance. How to remind the world that we are not separate from it." Elias felt a weight settle on his chest. Not fear, but responsibility. He understood now why the Sky-Dry people guarded this knowledge so carefully. "Why are you showing me this?" Elias asked quietly. "Because," Awan said, "you listen. And because the world beyond our forest has forgotten how." A gust of warm wind swept through the clearing, swirling the rain into a spiraling column that wrapped around the pillars like a living ribbon. The forest hummed. The rain whispered. And Elias felt himself becoming part of the rhythm. Awan placed a hand on his shoulder. "There is still one more thing you must learn," the elder said. Elias swallowed. "What's that?" Awan's eyes shone like wet cedar bark under lantern light. "How we became the Sky-Dry people in the first place." The rain fell harder, almost in anticipation. The pillars hummed deeper. The forest waited. And Elias knew. The next story would change everything. The origin of the Sky-Dry people. Awan led Elias deeper into the clearing, past the whispering canvas, past the spiraling pillars that hummed with the heartbeat of the forest. The rain slowed, falling now like drifting strands of silver thread. The world felt quieter, as if it, too, waited for the final story. They reached a single pillar unlike the rest. Taller, darker, wrapped in carvings so delicate they looked like strands of flowing wind. Awan placed his palm on it. "This," he whispered, "is where our story truly begins." Elias stepped closer. The pillar radiated warmth. An ancient, living warmth. Awan drew in a long breath. Many generations ago, before steel roads or cities, before maps were drawn or borders claimed, our ancestors lived as wanderers. They moved with the seasons, following the herds, the winds, the changing skies. He paused, feeling the grooves of the pillar. But then came the great endless rain. Elias listened, imagining the forest drowning under months of unbroken storms. It rained, Awan continued, for an entire year. Rivers overflowed. Homes washed away. The land shifted. And our people, who had always moved freely, found themselves trapped by the rising waters. The rain above them deepened, as if remembering. They tried building shelters. But everything rotted. They tried hiding in caves. But the storms found them. They tried outrunning the rain, but how do you outrun the sky? Elias felt the weight of those old failures. The helplessness. But then, Awan said gently, a young woman named Sanaa heard something no one else heard. He tapped the pillar. A whisper. Not from the storm, but from the forest beneath it. Sanaa realized the rain was not the enemy. It was only water following air. Air following shape. Shape following memory. So she watched, Awan said. And listened. And learned. She studied how water glided down tree bark instead of soaking it. How certain branches bent just enough to redirect a stream. How wind traveled through cedar groves in patterns that repeated again and again. For 3 months she watched, he continued, until she understood the secret. Dryness doesn't come from stopping the rain. Dryness comes from guiding the world around it. With that knowledge, Sana carved the first spirals. She taught her people to weave cedar wind nets. She reshaped their shelters so the rain never settled. Only passed. And when the next great storm came, Awan said, "Our ancestors stood beneath it, and remained dry." He stepped back from the pillar. That is when we became the sky-dry people. Not because we conquered the storm, but because a single young woman dared to understand it. Elias felt awe settle over him like warm air. "So everything you've shown me, the wind, the carvings, the whispering canvas, it all began with her?" Awan nodded. "And it continues with those who choose to listen." The storm above faded into a quiet mist. The pillars hummed softly, their spiraling grooves glowing with reflected rainlight. Awan placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. "You came to learn how we stay dry in 100 inches of rain." He smiled gently. "But dryness was never the real lesson. You understand that now?" Elias nodded. His heart felt full. With wonder, with gratitude, with something like peace. "What is the real lesson?" he asked. Awan looked toward the forest. "That nature is not a force to fight. It is a language to learn. And those who learn it never fear the storm." Elias closed his eyes as the final drops of rain slid past him without touching. The forest exhaled. The sky softened. And he finally felt what the sky-dry people felt every day. Not pressure, not danger, not conflict. But harmony. A harmony so profound that even the storm bowed to it. The rain stopped. The forest glowed. And Elias whispered to himself, "I will never forget this." Awan smiled. "That is how our story lives on." And so it ended. The tale of the people who learned to stay bone dry. In a world of endless rain. Not through power, but through understanding.